Try again. Keep asking because every time it's something else, you have to ask again. Okay? Something else. You should be working now. Good evening, everybody. Welcome aboard. Let's start another week of learning. Not start, but let's continue another week of learning. So everyone's very busy all the time, and we're doing good things. Let's admit how we got here. Okay, so we are going to do our three-step program for Parshas Vayeira. What's going on in the week's calendar? What's going on in the Parsha? And one practical, relevant life message that we can take for this week. This is one of those very special weeks that the highlight of this week is that there's nothing going on extraordinary. And that's what makes it so special because when we stop to notice that the ordinary is what Hashem treasures, it's a week like this week that makes it so special. It makes it special because it reminds us that every small choice that we make matters. And every small choice that we make is small in our world, it's enormous in Hashem's world. Because if we think about it, the most amazing things that we do don't really have to matter to Hashem anyhow. Even though they're very big to us, they're not that much bigger for Hashem. But Hashem decides what's important and what's not, and to Hashem, the small things are also extremely relevant. So when we say it's small, we mean to our understanding they're small. But as we know, Hashem actually travels it, and this is one of those very special Mar Cheshvan weeks. Let's talk about what's going on in the Parsha, because this week's Parsha is actually one of those amazing Parshas that are mentioned at this time of the year in the Hayom Yom. And the opening of this week's Parsha is the name of the Parsha, Vayeira, and Hashem appears, and the entire Parsha is known as Vayeira, and this brings to mind the story of the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab was the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, the father of the previous Rebbe, the grandfather of Rebbe Chaim Mushka. The Rebbe Rashab, when he was a young boy, 4 or 5 years old, his birthday was always works out. It's going to be next week on the 20th day of Mar Cheshvan. His birthday was a time where he would go in to visit his grandfather. Now, he was a young boy. His grandfather was one of the greatest Rebbes around. They estimate he had probably 1 million followers in those times. Now, 1 million followers before you had Facebook and before we had social media was a big deal. And the reason why he had so many followers is because across the whole of Russia, the Rabbanim would follow him, and the Rabbanim would follow him with their communities. And therefore, you have so many people coming to his grandfather, and he would have a personal audience with their Tzemach Tzedek, his grandfather, on his birthday. And at 4 or 5 years old, he walks in. We're getting an echo. He walks in to his grandfather's study, and there he is crying because he was very upset about something he had learned in school. What had he learned in school that made him so upset? And he tells his grandfather, how is it that Avraham Avinu gets an appearance and Hashem reveals himself to Avram, and he doesn't have that experience? Now, coming for a 4 or 5 year old, that's a fantastic question. I mean, of course, we know there's an answer. Avram was a very, very special man. He happened to be the first and the founder of Yiddishkeit, if you like. You should keep trying. It should have done itself. But as the Tzemach Tzedek answers his grandson, we learn a very important message from that as well, and it's recorded in the Hayom Yom. What is the important message? You know what? What's that? The boxes go. You know what? Try and refresh. I'll try and go back and go. You know, I'm not going to be able to help you anymore. If it doesn't work, it's not going to work. We'll have to do a different day. That's lacha. Yeah, Tzemach Tzedek famously answers his grandson that a Yid who's 99 years old and he's been through so much, yet he knows that he has to have himself a bris milah, a circumcision at that age, he deserves that Hashem should reveal himself to him. And of course, the Rebbe explains that 99 is almost completion. 99 is almost 100. And yet Avraham Avinu realized that although he's 99, he's almost there, he still needs to make continued sacrifice and push himself further still in order to reach 100. So metaphorically, it's not so much about how old he was when he had his circumcision. It's more about the level of keep pushing, keep growing, keep continuing doing good things. And don't make the mistake of saying, if I still need to grow, doesn't that mean that I've been wasting my time until now? Because that could be really dangerous. And it's definitely not Yiddish. A Yiddish person knows that even if I'm told I need to do more, it's not because I haven't done enough because I'm a loser. It's because I have more potential. I have the ability. I can do more, and therefore I'm being pushed to do more. This is very Yiddish. And this is why Hashem appears to Avraham Avinu, because he pushed so hard. He'd worked on himself so much, and yet was still aware that there was room for more growth without feeling bent out of shape because of that. And this is Avraham's right, so to speak, to witness and to experience Hashem revealing himself to him. And that's the opening of this week's Parshah, where 99 years old, at the end of last week's Parshah, Avraham has the bris. And then this week's Parshah opens up where Hashem reveals and comes to visit Avraham Avinu in a way that had never been experienced by anyone before. And Hashem comes to visit Avraham Avinu, to visit those who are sick. Bikur Chaylim. Avraham Avinu, as Rashi tells us, the third day after his bris, he was feeling extremely weak. And Hashem came to do Bikur Chaylim to help him feel better. And it's during that meeting where Hashem came to speak to him, where all of a sudden, Avram picks himself up and walks off on this meeting with Hashem. Where is he going? There are three strangers in the distance that have appeared. And he says to Hashem, I really appreciate you meeting me and coming to spend time with me, but there's something more important right now, and that is looking after your children. How powerful. And Hashem agrees. And he gets up and he runs out after them. And the truth is, we know the background of the story was that Avram wasn't aware at the time, but those three individuals were actually not human beings. They were angels looking like humans. And they were there sent for this very purpose, to give Avram the opportunity to continue what he loved to do, to share the kindness. That's what he does. He hosts these three people looking like angels looking like people, and he serves them fantastic feast. And interestingly, he doesn't do it himself. He includes and involves his entire family in the hosting process. Unlike Noach, who was told by Hashem to build a teva and builds it on his own, Avram includes his son Yishmael to go and help. He includes Sarah, his wife, to come and help. And everybody, as a joint effort, kept the family together and educated, leading by example, but including everyone into the process. And that was one of Avram's secrets to success, where he trusted and believed in people, starting with his family. And as that party, they have a promise made at the end where Avram is told that he'll have a child within a year, exactly a year to come. And the other two malachim are also on missions. And he gets healed from the pain that he has. And only after they leave from discussing all of this, Hashem tells Avram, you know where they're going? Those two malachim, two of those guests, are actually headed towards Sodom and Vayeira, the place of terrible behavior. That was a big part of last week's Sedra. And in this week's Sedra, we learn that Hashem tells Avram, it's become so terrible there. I have no choice but to push the reset button on the entire Sodom. It's so terrible what's going on there. And we learn in great detail how Avraham Avinu, without missing a beat, jumps straight in, lobbying, negotiating, and pushing to save the wicked people of Sodom from destruction. And he tries every argument he can until he runs out of arguments and eventually has to agree that Hashem's plan has to go ahead, but not before he puts up his best and strongest arguments challenging Hashem. Whilst the angels go down to Sodom and Avram runs out of arguments, they get the green light. And before they can actually destroy the city, they have to take Lot and his family out. Because although they had joined the bad guys, in the merit that Lot had together with Avram, he was going to be saved. And therefore, the angels had to come to Lot and save him, which in itself was an entire story. Because, firstly, when they found out, the people of Sodom heard that Lot had guessed, it didn't bode well. And they came to bring their wicked ways of chasing away and hurting anyone who dared be a guest and look for hospitality in a place like Sodom. And Lot actually puts his neck out for them to an extent. And the angels say to him, look, we'll sort this one out ourselves. And they explain to Lot, see how terrible a place this is. We must destroy it. And therefore you and your family should come. And Lot tries to bring with his entire family. Only those who are living at home who are willing to come with. His wife and his two daughters leave. And under strict instructions, the Malachim tell them, you are lucky enough to be saved. You don't have the right to witness and watch the destruction that will befall those who will be left behind. Unfortunately for Lot's wife, who didn't take that seriously and look back, or the temptation was too strong, and the pasuk describes that she turns into a pillar of salt, and she did not make it to safety. And making it to safety was only Lot and his two daughters. And as the pasuk describes again in detail, they saw smoke rising from the enormous destruction of what they once called home. And as they were there high in the mountains, hiding away, they felt like the entire world was being destroyed. And they thought they were like Noach in his time, the only survivors of all humanity. And under those circumstances, they believed that if they weren't to have children, there would be no continuation to humanity. And therefore Lot's daughters got their father Lot drunk, and each one of them, one at a time, lay with their father and became pregnant. And Ammon and Moav, the two nations that would become big names in the Torah, are born one from each of those daughters, daughters of Lot. Avram at the time moves further away, and he moves down to Gerar. And there, when he moves to Gerar, is Avimelech, Melech Pelishtim. And Avimelech is again similar to what happened to Sarah and Parai in the previous Parshah and last week, happens again in this week's Parshah, where Avram is worried about being harmed for the sake of somebody trying to take away his wife. Says Sarah is his sister, and unfortunately Sarah gets taken to the palace. And again, Hashem has to perform a miracle to safeguard Sarah while she's in Avimelech's palace. And during that night, Avimelech has a very real dream where Hashem appears to Avimelech and accuses him taking a married woman. And he claims innocence. And Hashem says, I understand where you're coming from. Bring back this man's wife, and he will pray for you. And that will be a sign to you that he understands and he knows that you did nothing wrong. You didn't act terribly. And that's exactly what happens. Avimelech brings back Sarah to Avram, and Avram davens that Avimelech should be healed. And of course, Avimelech rewards Avram and gives him, but unlike last week's Sedra, he doesn't chase him away from his land. He lets him stay, and he looks after him. And Avimelech and Avram stay together. And Avimelech puts out major protection, so to speak, to make sure Avram is well looked after. The Parsha continues that the time came that Avram's promise that he had a year earlier would now come to fruition. And Avraham and Sarah have a baby, call him Yitzchak, as Hashem had promised. And on the 8th day, for the first time in history, a Yiddish child was born and had his bris on the 8th day, and that was Yitzchak. His father was a ripe old age of 100 years old, and his mother was a ripe old age of 90 years old, Sarah. At the time of the child's birth, and 8 days old, they have a bris. Ishmael at this point is 13 years of age. And as they grow, Yishmael is 13 years older than his half-brother, Yitzchak. And he's not very proud to be his brother. He's actually feeling very intimidated knowing that Yitzchak was born to Sarah, Avram's real wife. And unfortunately, he started behaving inappropriately, both morally, trying to teach Yitzchak bad habits, and also trying to do dangerous stuff to somehow orchestrate a mistake in which he would become the sole survivor, the sole heir, and would inherit all of Avram's property, all of Avram's belongings. When Sarah realizes that her son's education and well-being is on the line, she turns to Avram and says, Avram, there is no way Yishmael will remain around if he's going to be a bad influence on Yitzchak, the ultimate Yiddish mama, where everything is put aside for the sake of the education and the well-being of her child. And at first Avram is very hesitant, sending away his son, Yishmael, his older son. And Hashem says to Avram, listen to her. She's a greater prophetess than you are a prophet. And Avram listens and sends Hagar and Yishmael out into the desert. And the Torah describes how Yishmael was sick. And Hagar was very distraught. She was watching her son die in the heat of the desert. And they were running out of water. And she sat to cry. And Yishmael cried. Famously, Hashem listens to Yishmael's cry and was going to save Yishmael's life with a miracle. And as Rashi points out, Medrash points out, that Yishmael was not grown, young, but he was destined, as we know now in hindsight, to be a very, very difficult stumbling block and hardship, cause of lots of sorrows for the Yiddish people. And the Malachim, the angels, came and cried to Hashem and said, why would you save Yishmael, knowing how much hardships and harm he will do to your descendants? And the pasuk says that Hashem listened to Yishmael's cries, Ba'asher hu sham, because at the time where he was then, literally that would mean his time of need, he was very unwell. Says the Medrash, actually, Ba'asher hu sham, Hashem answered the angels, look at him now. It's true that we know the future. And the future will be that Yishmael will be very difficult. But right now he's sincere. Right now he deserves the miracle. And we use this piece of the Torah reading on Rosh Hashanah in order to ask Hashem to notice us at a time that we are sincere and work with us, even though we have a track record that as the Yom Tovim finish, we might not keep up to all our commitments. But during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where we are very sincere, we ask Hashem to grant us a good year, Ba'asher hu sham, just like he had done to Yishmael. And the miracle happens. All of a sudden, the Malach shows you Hagar, a well of water right there, hiding in plain sight. And she gives her son to drink, and he starts to become better. And he promises her that she'll be okay. The Torah then continues to tell the story of Avimelech and Avram and Beersheba, the oath that they took with 7 sheep over the wells. And the end of the Parshah, is the greatest test that Avram went through. And this is the test of the Akedah, the 10th of the 10 tests, where Hashem says to Avram, take your son and offer him up as an offering on the altar. And of course, this would have gone against everything Avram would have been preaching. That God doesn't want the destruction of his people. Hashem wants us to thrive with his mitzvahs. And yet here Avram's being told by Hashem himself to take his very own son that he'd waited so many years for and bring him above us as an offering. Everything that he didn't say, and Avram didn't question. And with alacrity, right away he went up to the mountain and followed the directions. And it wasn't in 30 seconds. It was 3 days of travel. Enough time to contemplate and to decide and to think about what he's about to do. And have a conversation with his son, who's 37 years old by now. And they both knew that they wanted to do what Hashem wants, come what may. And as Avram had tied up his son and put him onto the altar and drew the knife, Hashem's angel right away says to Avram, stop. Take him off the altar. And Avram's like, what's going on? You told me to bring him up as an offering. And Hashem says back, yes, I told you bring him up. And now you brought him up. I didn't say kill him. I said bring him up. And that's all I want from you. God forbid, don't hurt him. Don't even draw any blood from him. And instead right there he found Ayel Acher, a ram in the thorn bush, brought the ram up as an offering, and forever this story will be a merit to Avram's descendants, to the Yiddish people, how Avram's commitment and alacrity to do Hashem's desire, come what may, was the foundation for all of Yiddishkeit. This is Parshas Vayeira. Each one of these stories, as always, carries a lot, and I'm sure you can imagine the Akedah has enormous amount, and the bris and the meeting of Hashem right after that is an enormous topic, and of course all the other things, including the story of Sdoim and Avimelech, and all the other parts of this each parsha carry a lot of depth. Today, though, we're going to focus on one particular area. We're going to look for one practical, relevant life message. The title here is Not My Thing, Not the Point. Stepping out of character when the moment demands it. And we're going to focus on the story of Avraham Avinu behaving out of his own character. The particulars of the story we'll get to in a moment. The question we start off with, question for discussion: do you ever ignore your strengths in the service of others? So you have things that you're very good at, and sometimes you put that to one side in service of others. Try and think. You don't have to talk about yourself. You talk about how it should be, but a scenario when it would be appropriate and relevant to ignore your own strengths in the service of others. Help me out.
Yeah, if you want somebody else to shine, let them shine and stand behind.
Brilliant. And therefore, in that case, by not speaking up, by not taking the limelight, in service of others, I've done the right thing rather than ignoring what I could do very well. That's not the point. The point is I let someone else shine. Fantastic. When else do we have another example of putting our strengths to one side in the service of others?
Well, I suppose Abraham also had strengths that he didn't always make use of, because he did think of other people as opposed to himself. And he
definitely right. Also, we're looking for details, though.
I know, in the respect that when Hashem spoke to him, he did what he wanted to. But when his wife spoke to him about Hagar, that was something a little bit different. He could, I think people say, why didn't he do something else? After all, this child was already 13 when his other son was being born. So why didn't he say, no, he's here, he's my son, Dad? But he didn't say that. He let his wife shine through because she was the mother of the future person who was going to be absolutely some backbone of Judaism.
Absolutely. I'm just going to throw in there that particular case should be taken within context, because Hashem had to weigh in on that one. So before he agreed, he took advice. Because it's a very serious calculation to make. In that particular case, it was the right thing to do. And it's also important to notice that there's a valid argument that at times it's not the right thing to do. In his case, it was, and he had to get the okay from Hashem. Just to borrow that topic for a second, I know it's a little bit off what we're talking about here. I want to throw it in here. We see also by the Akedah a similar sort of setup. When Hashem tells Avram to take his son and offer him up as an offering, Hashem personally says so to Avram. But you'll note that when it's time to take him off the altar, he sends an angel. Interesting. And of course, many commentators notice this and say, when it comes to doing something that is hurtful to somebody else, we're extremely cautious. Avram would not have listened to an angel.
However, there's one thing that really...
Let me just finish the thought.
Okay, finish off and then I'll ask you a question.
When it comes to bringing up on the altar, only because Hashem said so. To save his son, it was enough to hear an angel of Hashem say, actually, Hashem wants you to take him off, because that is what is usually the correct thing to do, and therefore with an angel's instruction, it was enough. I'm going to say the same thing when it comes to sending away a child from home. When Hashem said to him, listened to Sarah in this case. She's a great prophetess. She knew it was the right thing
Mm.
to do in those circumstances. Yes, go ahead.
My question is, when you read this parsha, you always feel that Abraham was taking a young son and leading him up before telling him what was going to happen. But we know from reading the Sedra that this son was already 37 years old. It
Okay.
wasn't somebody who he was leading as a young boy and the boy was telling him. Wouldn't you think that at 37 years old he would have questioned something? Like, why is my father leading me and lying me down like this? What's he doing? I mean, it just strikes me that whenever I read it, I always think of somebody young going, holding his father's hand. And here is this man who actually isn't married yet either, which is also, I'm just saying, it was just a point.
Well said. Well said. Although he knew what
Come
was
on.
going to happen way before that. Along
Mm,
the way, he already had this conversation. As they were
yeah.
walking, they left behind the servants and they were walking together. The Pasuk describes the conversation where he
Mm,
says to his father, "Where is the sheep?"
mm.
And his father answers, "Hashem will provide a sheep, and if not, beneath."
Yeah, but they see a ram, don't they? And it's all caught up, and then they
The
have to
ram is
kill that
only, they only noticed the ram after he's
afterwards.
already on the altar.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a very difficult story to read. But that's
Mm.
perhaps partly why it's so important for us to read it, to remind ourselves that the reason we don't do that is not because it doesn't feel right. It's because Hashem told us not to do that.
And it also in this parasha very much shows Sarah as being the um, a person in her own right, in the
Absolutely.
fact that she laughed when the angel said you're going to have a child, and she was like, haha, which is unheard of to do that, and also that she was instrumental in sending her maidservant and the other child away. It's
Absolutely.
mm,
Correct.
okay.
And in making sure that Yitzhak will be born.
Absolutely, I
Yeah. So
understand.
there's a lot to be learned, a lot to be said on that front. And
Mm,
you know that if we're going to go down, we're going to miss out this sikha. If we have time afterwards, we'll mention a little bit about
sorry,
it as well. But let's focus on this question.
I finished
We're
now.
talking about our strengths, and we're looking at Avram Avinu at his strengths, and we're looking for where Avram Avinu puts aside his strengths in service of others. If anyone else wanted to weigh in on the question, when would that be appropriate? Go ahead, Claire.
Well,
Can you
I'm
hear
not
me?
really sure if this is, but if you make a donation, so you're sort of trying to benefit others, but you don't sort of plaster your name all over it, you stay anonymous. Is that the kind of thing that you're thinking about? Or
Interesting. I was thinking of something else, but that's a great insight. Sometimes
yeah,
Mm,
it's the benefit of others because it allows others the dignity of not having to be subservient or accepting in such a
yeah.
difficult way. Amazing, interesting, and also it's humility, and
Hmm.
it's a strength that you've got to be able to give,
Hmm.
putting it to one side in service of others. We're going to go through a slightly different angle.
Mhm.
It's going to
Can
be an
you hear
angle.
me?
Sorry, yeah, we hear you now. Who's that?
Oh, yeah.
Sylvia.
Well,
Oh, Sylvia.
one thing we do is when we teach children, we put our strength to one side.
Mm,
Okay. All right. I like what you're saying. Teaching children. In the Hasidic teachings, teaching children is considered a very lofty responsibility because to teach an adult, they're adults already. They'll take what they want, they'll leave what they don't like. But children are very, very susceptible. And therefore, it's a very important role. But yes, it's a strength. We put aside our own study in order to teach children. I like it. And Avram certainly
And
did
with it,
that.
yeah. And with Abraham and his son, what Mrs. Abrahams was talking about, it's obedience and respect. And it's a commandment, isn't it, to respect your parents?
Oh, yes. It's in the Ten Commandments.
Hmm.
So, even though Ishmael was, not Ishmael, Isaac was 37, he's still respecting his father and being obedient.
let me just say, if today's day and age, someone's father came and said, I need to slaughter you, it would be disrespectful to the father to say, yes, sir. It would be much more respectful to say, Father, let's go to the doctor together. You know, if somebody said, I saw Hashem today, that's probably what we would say. But Yitzchak knew that his father was the kind of person who, if he was talking like this, is only speaking like this because Hashem had said so. So, yes, it was obedience and respect, but because he knew who Avram was. And he knew that if Avram was talking, it was because Hashem had communicated with him as such. Yes, well said. We're going to move on into what the Sikh is going to talk about. Let's just jump the gun and say the end and then build it up. The answer is going to be that Avram Avinu was very good at thinking of others. He's very good at being kind. He was extremely good at being loving. But when the moment called for it, he put all his kindness, lovingness, all his, chesed to one side and did what he had to do because that's what the moment required. And although it wasn't his nature, and though it was really not his style, and he could have easily said, I'm just going to be quiet. I'm not going to speak up because it's so against everything that I do. But when it was necessary, he spoke, thought, behaved exactly what was needed for those circumstances, even though it was polar opposite for his personality. And that's putting my strengths to one side in service of others that we want to try and pick up, because we have to know our strengths. We must know what we're good at. That's what a gift Hashem gave us, and that's what Hashem invests us into his wonderful world for, to use our strengths. But we must also be aware that sometimes the call of the hour is to use the opposite of my strength, and I have to be able to switch and throw myself into whatever is needed when it's needed, even if it's very different than what I'm comfortable with. That's where we're going to go. It was a bit of a weak worded question, but it was a great question all the same. We're going to move right along. Claire, did you want to say something?
No, I was just trying to read what's on the screen.
It says the following. It says 3 angels arrive at Abram's door on their way to a mission. The mission is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah are about to be destroyed by these angels. And on the way, they make a stop at Avram's hotel, free hotel, or whatever you want to call it. And this is where our Parsha opens up. So let's read some text, and we'll build up this case where Avram Avinu, at a moment's notice, drops his regular, normative, loving kindness and just throws himself into something very different. Says the Pasuk, after Avram has a long hosting, a conversation that's well documented in the Parsha, and now these guests are leaving, and Hashem says, now, Hashem Amar, Hamachasani me Avram asher niseh. Now God had said, shall I hide from Avram what I am about to do? And we read, after all, Avram is to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him, quoting his own words that he had promised Avram last week. And therefore says verse 19, for I have singled him out, that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of Hashem by doing what is just and right, in order that Hashem may bring about for Avram what has been promised him. Then God said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and the great sin is so grave. He tells Avram, I have to share this with you. You are so important to me, and you are the father of all nations. I must tell you that there's one nation, or one area, Sodom and Gomorrah. It's so great, the outrage, and their sin is so grave. I will go down to see whether they have acted altogether according to the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will take note. So either I'm going to destroy them now, or I'm going to put the cries that I'm hearing on hold until the time is right. The angel went on from there to Sodom, while Avram remained standing before Hashem. He had just heard that Sodom and Gomorrah, their entire life, all the inhabitants and everything that was there was on the line. And Hashem says to him that he's going to check whether they will be destroyed or the destruction will be put on hold. What happens next is Avram speaks up. Vigash Avram Vayeira ha'aftis betzadikim nosha Avram approached and said, will you actually destroy the righteous with the wicked? Now, interesting comment to make to Hashem. Will you actually destroy the righteous with the wicked? Does that sound like a prayer? Does that sound like a request? Does that sound like an accusation? Challenging Hashem. And actually, that is how the commentators understand Avram's response to Hashem. Avram responds by debating God on the justice of his decision. Will you actually destroy the righteous with the wicked? And with that, Avram says to Hashem, you're about to destroy the entire vicinity, all the people, and you're going to include everyone, even the righteous people? Now, we did speak last week that Avram was the number one debater. He was great. But to pick an argument with Hashem, that's stretching it. That's probably not respectful. It certainly doesn't sound like a believer who turns around to Hashem and says, actually, God, you might have got this one wrong. You shouldn't really kill the good guys with the bad guys. How dare you? I mean, it doesn't say how dare you, but it's one moment, one step away from saying that. Will you actually do such a terrible thing, destroy the righteous with the wicked? And this is what we want to talk about. Avram's approach to Hashem comes in guns blazing. And he speaks to Hashem, borderline chutzpah. And who's he arguing on behalf of? The people of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
And he's willing to talk to Hashem like this for the sake of these people. I'm not going to take the call, but I'm going to say Refuah Shlema for Michal ben Chana Halevi. Okay. So the Pasuk actually records a very long-winded conversation, negotiation, where Avraham Avinu argues with Hashem further and further. If there are 50 righteous people, 10 per city, will you save the 5 cities? And Hashem says, I would, but there ain't no 50. He says, you know what? If there are 45, would you save on behalf of 9 per city? He says, yeah, fine, I'll be the 10th, says Hashem. 9 per each one, but you ain't going to find no 45. And he drops the numbers. What about 40? Will you save 4 cities? 30, 20, 10. And when he finally says, well, there's no 10 either, Avram's like, okay, I'm out of ammunition. What else can I say? And that's where, in the verse 33, Hashem departed when he finishes speaking to Avram, and Avram returned to his place. And all of that is recorded in this week's Parshah. How Avram Avinu speaks very straight and very harshly, very strictly to Hashem. Right after this pasuk, the pasuk takes back the story to where the angels are. The angels went on from there to Sodom, while Avram remained standing before Hashem. And of course, we know the rest was that the city was destroyed after Lot was saved. But here's where the excitement starts, because as the Sikh is going to point out, just go back here. When Avram is about to start his arguing, the verse has a very interesting term to describe his opening argument. Avram approached and said, will you actually destroy the righteous with the wicked? Without leaving the suspense too much, the word Vayigash means approached. Vayigash Avraham, and Avram approached. Who did he approach? He approached Hashem. The problem that the Mefarshim are going to have to deal with is that Avram and Hashem were already talking, because Hashem had called Abraham and told him what he's about to do. So what does it mean that Avram approaches Hashem and starts arguing back? Where's he coming from to approach Hashem? Why does he need to approach if he stood right there? He drew near. Vayigash. This drawing near, says the Abarbanel, was not spatial, but rather he drew near to battle on their behalf and to increase praying for them. It's not a space manner where he was going from one place to another place, because that's usually how we understand an approach or drawing near. In a base things, approach means moving close in space when someone physically steps towards another person, and that would imply I'm stepping up to somewhere where I wasn't before. But there's a psychological approaching, which is also the same wording, but it means not that I moved from point A to point B, but I shifted my thought process. I shifted my emotional positioning. A more nuanced meaning to draw near with intention. When someone mentally or emotionally engages with a moment of challenge. And that engagement, drawing into the challenge, leaning into it, can also use the same word vayigash. And this is going to be the key to understanding Avram's approach to arguing back at Hashem, almost at the level of fighting, of accusing, of attacking, so to speak, Hashem's decision. Avram Avinu changes his mental or emotional position in order to engage Hashem on this one. Let's read how it says it in the Sikha. Before the verse Avram approached, it says, Avram remained standing before Hashem. They had a conversation. This clearly indicates that Avram had not physically moved from his place before Hashem. Therefore, we cannot interpret approached in the simple sense of a physical movement from one place to another. Rather, we're compelled to say that approach here refers to a spiritual movement. Avram shifted from one inner emotional and mental state to a new state. And in order to understand this well, we're just going to do a bit of background, what we know about Avram Avinu. And then we'll better appreciate the shift, the approach that he was making, not in space, but in shifting his approach, his mental and emotional state into a new state that would allow him and compel him to speak the way he did to Hashem. Let's read the Medrash. This is the Medrash Rabbah. Avram approached and said, quote, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemiah, and the sages. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemiah, and the rest of the sages had a discussion, debated the matter. Rabbi Yehuda said the term approaching means vayigash, for battle. As in, you find in the story of David and Yoav, Yoav and the people who were with him approached Aram to battle. Same idea, vayigash, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda says that in this verse, Avram Avinu approached Hashem and he was going to fight Hashem. He's going to war against Hashem. Battle. And that's what the term vayigash is used for elsewhere in the Torah. Equally, at this pasuk says Rabbi Yehuda. However, his colleague Rabbi Nechemiah, times the Mishnah said, approaching means for appeasement. As it says, children of Yehuda approached Yeshua, and there you have an expression of trying to appease and find favor in whoever it was they were approaching. Says Rabbi Nechemiah, in this case, Avram stepped forward to Hashem, not to fight Hashem, God forbid, but to seek Hashem's appeasement, to somehow try and find favor in Hashem's eyes to save the people of Sodom. Yet the sages argued both on Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemiah. The sages said, approaching is for prayer. Vayigash means to pray. As it says in the story again with David, it was the time of offering up the afternoon service at the Navi, Elijah the prophet approached Vayigash, and he said, God of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, let it be known today that you are in God in Israel. And this is the story of Har Carmel, where Eliyahu, using the word Vayigash Eliyahu, he stepped forward to pray to Hashem. Rabbi Elazar interpreted. Avram said, all of the above. If it entails battle, I'm coming with battle. If it entails appeasement, I'm coming to Hashem with appeasement. If it entails prayer, I'm coming with prayer. So Avram Avinu speaks to Hashem, and the word the pasuk uses to describe that conversation is the word vayigash, stepping forward. Now, as we pointed out, he wasn't stepping anywhere. He was stood right there. But we're using the word stepping forward to make reference to what stepping forward connotes. And here we have a Medrash Rabbah of 3 different suggestions, and Elazar saying that Avram intended all of the 3 suggestions, whether it is battle, appeasement, or prayer, whatever it takes, he was going to use whatever he could in order to save the people of Sodom. So let's just put this on the screen like this. Vayigash could mean battle, it could mean appeasement, and it could mean prayer. And Avram was ready for all of them. And when he approached Hashem, he wasn't going anywhere, but he came to Hashem. He came back to Hashem, if you like. He answered Hashem, I'm not letting this happen. Whatever I can, I'm going to do right now to beseech on behalf of the people of Sodom. Battle, appeasement, prayer, you name it, I'm here. I'm going to beg, I'm going to pray, I'm going to argue and fight to be able to save these people. So,
Rabbi
Rashi,
Cohen,
yes?
can I ask a question? It might seem a little bit thick, but why did Hashem tell Abraham in the first place that he was going to do this? Why didn't Hashem just go off and do it?
Oh,
Why,
well,
why
Hashem does try to explain that. Hashem
Yeah.
does say, I'm telling you because you're the father of all these people. You're the father of all nations. But that's a very good point. You know what? Let's answer that, even though that was going to come up at the end. But let's say the
Oh,
answer,
sorry.
and we'll remind ourselves later that we've said this already.
hmm
The Torah tells us that Hashem spoke to Abraham and told us. And the Torah wants us to know that Hashem gave Abraham the opportunity to put in a good word.
Okay.
And we must know that when we see something happening to somebody else, even though they deserve it, it's Hashem's way of showing us that we can pray for them, even if they deserve it. I mean, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were very deserving what was coming their way, clearly. But the messaging for us is that we are told this, we have been, we witness these things, and we notice these things, we become aware of them, so that we could pray on their behalf, on behalf of Hashem's wonderful world. You have a similar story when it was after the golden calf. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, let me be, and I will destroy the Jewish people. After they danced around a golden calf, 40 days after they committed to me, and Moshe Rabbeinu hears the words, let me be, and I will destroy them. And right away he realizes, Hashem says to me, let me be. He's given me the option of whether or not I will let Hashem be. That's my cue. This is why Hashem is telling me this. And this is what we're learning here. Avram was told this so that he may put in a good argument. Now, although in his particular case, it was going to be futile and it wouldn't work out, but it's not futile because he's teaching us what we can do every time, even if it doesn't completely save the day, the prayers won't go to waste. But we're learning now, when we say pray, we don't only mean pray. We mean for real pray. Throw ourselves into it, and just how much we mean that is what we're going to focus on here for the next few minutes. We're going to focus on when Avraham Avinu realized that Hashem is telling it to me. He's made me aware of what's about to happen. This is my cue. This is my calling, not just to do lip service and say something nice, but to really put myself into it. How far? Further than I would ever be comfortable. Beyond all my comforts. Because if this is the call of the hour, what I'm used to and what's my general approach to life fades away. Because there's a tremendously important calling right here. Let's read this inside from Rashi on this pasuk. He actually wrote to the prime approach. We find the verb to approach used in the sense of coming to near to wage war. As we read the Medrash, so Yoav drew near into battle, of coming near to persuade by entreaty, as we heard, and for Judah approached him, and coming near to pray from the Navi. Avraham went in with all these methods in mind, to fight by speaking stern words, to persuade by entreaty, and to pray, all on behalf of the people of Sodom. So Avraham approached Hashem with total commitment, ready to do whatever it would take to save Sodom. Now what we're going to do very quickly is highlight that Avraham Avinu is Mr. Chesed, Mr. Kindness, loving kindness and generosity. In Kabbalah, and often quoted in Chassidus, we learn about right, left, center. Right is Chesed, which is kindness and generosity. Left is Gevura, strength and discipline. And center is Tiferes, beauty and harmony. When you think about combining colors is where you get beauty. And that is the combination of Chesed and Gevura together merges to create beauty and harmony, usually translated as mercy or compassion, which is a blend between discipline and generosity. Whereas generosity sounds very kind and giving, it doesn't take into consideration so much the recipient, it's more about the giver. If the recipient is worthy or unworthy, it doesn't have to make a difference. The main thing is that the giver wants to be kind. Compared to discipline is all about the recipient. Does the recipient deserve this or not? Now, it sounds like a very tough giver, but actually it's a very involved giver. It's a giver that very much takes into account exactly what the recipient is worthy of. And then you have harmony, where the giver notices that the recipient may not be worthy, but because of the merciful situation, nonetheless, Tiferes will blend some level of kindness into the discipline so that the generosity will come out in a way of mercy that is helpful to the recipient, but only that balance that it doesn't go to waste, or you pour in kindness into somebody who's going to waste it or misuse it. But let's just put this into the context of the three forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Each of the others embodied a distinct divine attribute that they expressed in their lives and that shaped their relationship with Hashem and their relationship with the world. Starting off with, this is from the Zohar Chadash, Avram Avinu. Avram knew Hashem through chesed, kindness, which is the attribute of gedula, greatness, the right hand of the king. That is the trait he grasped and never abandoned. He constantly did good for people. And this was established about him for his actions aligned with that spiritual level. Says the Zohar, Avram Avinu was Mr. Kindness. Everything about his service to Hashem, everything about his influence to humanity and the world at large came and exuded and was symbolic of chesed in its fullest sense. Says the Zohar Chadash, Yitzchak knew Hashem through the attribute of gevura, of strength. He is called the fear, Pachad Yitzchak, and remained in awe of him always. And this was Yitzchak's approach: severity, gevura, strength, and discipline. Yaakov, the third of the forefathers, knew Hashem through the attribute of tiferes, beauty/harmony, which is a blend of chesed and pachad, fear and strength. And it's called emes, is the attribute of truth. This was the trait he embraced, and this is what it says in Micha, Titen emes leYaakov, you will give truth to Yaakov. So in summary, we have chesed is Abraham, gevura is Yitzchak, and tiferes is Yaakov. In this particular case, when it was a question of the people of Sodom about to be destroyed, and Avram Avinu gets wind of it, is made to be aware of what's about to happen. Avram Avinu realizes that his loving kindness might not get the needed results. Avram embodied the attribute of chesed and was naturally a man of kindness. He stepped out of his comfort zone to confront Hashem. Battle with fullest strength and appeal to all three divine attributes, starting with battle, including appeasement, and including even prayer. And one could argue appeasement would be kindness, battle would be severity, and prayer would be the combination of both. But Avram realized that right now, starting with kindness doesn't stand the greatest chance. And therefore, without resolving to his regular approach, he put on someone else's hat and went full steam ahead and argued with Hashem with loud arguments, almost accusing Hashem. How could you do this? Don't! You can almost hear the cry in Avram's voice. No! Let's not let this happen. Why? Because this moment requires not loving kindness in a relaxed, kind of warm approach. It needs urgent reaction right here, right now. And this is what Kor Aryeh writes, know that our sages of blessed memory Sorry, Yehuda Law is the Maharal, Maharal of Prague. Know that our sage of blessed memory hinted at something very profound in this medrash. Avram directed his words towards three divine names, Kael, Elohim, and Havaya. Corresponding to the name Elohim, which represents strict justice, he spoke harshly, as if waging battle. Corresponding to the name Kael, which signifies kindness, he spoke words of appeasement. And corresponding to the name of Havaya, the unique divine name, which is the combination, he directed prayer and mercy. And he came all above. The question becomes, Avram Avinu, Mr. Kindness, Mr. Chesed, who the Zohar says everything about you is all Chesed. What gave you the strength to act so far out of your nature? What motivates Avram Avinu to drop his kindness in this case? And the answer is, it is well known Avram's defining trait is Avram, my beloved. Note the love word, Ahavai. So it's puzzling how the Apostle Avram would speak harshly, and especially to Hashem, of all things. Even more, of the three approaches, battle, appeasement, and prayer, Avram began with speaking stern words harshly. From this we understand that although Avram employed all these methods, nevertheless, his initial approach was to speak stern words. Now, given his deep love, shouldn't he have started with appeasement and prayer and tried that first? And the answer is no, not now. At this point, it was important for Avram to put this to one side. Avram acted beyond his nature because he understood it wasn't about him. My own strengths, my style, which I'm so good at, and I serve Hashem with, is kindness. But if that's about how I do well, then that's what I would do now. But if I always do what I do well, not because it's me, but because that's how I best serve Hashem, then whenever the requirement is something else in order to serve Hashem, that will follow suit. His motivation was to fulfill Hashem's will always. And therefore, adapting the approach to what moment required rather than following his personal indications was exactly what made it work. Interesting. At the heat of the moment, when it was most needed, that would not be in a time to try and work on himself, to quickly change gears. This sort of practice of being able to focus on what's always needed takes place when it's not an emergency, when it's the regular run of the mill, and my strengths are on show, and I'm doing well, and I'm good at what I'm doing, and it feels comfortable. That's the time to ask myself, can I do the same thing? Not just because it feels good. Can I continue doing this because that's what Hashem wants from me? And the barometer, the measure, or perhaps the test of whether this is actually the case comes out when I need to switch gears into something that I'm uncomfortable with. And what we're saying here is, don't wait for an emergency. Don't wait for things to urgently need to be done out of my comfort zone. The starting time and the correct time to practice this is all the time. To remember that even if things are comfortable, even if things are running smoothly, now is the time to remind myself to do so because Hashem wants me to do so. And then, taking the Avram message, if all of a sudden Hashem makes me aware of something that requires going out of my comfort zone, that's what I'm doing all the time. Even when I'm in my comfort zone, it's because it's Hashem zone. And therefore, the change and the switch will certainly slide straight into place as it did in Avram's situation, which he teaches us now. Let's just read this last quote. This episode on Torah is a powerful instruction to all of Avram's children. When a situation arrives involving saving the Jewish soul, whether in a physical or spiritual danger, to bring the hearts of Jews together close to the Father in heaven, don't hesitate or calculate. Do they deserve? Is this right? Perhaps somebody else should do it. Get involved with all your strength, even in a manner that feels contrary to your nature. Even if it involves speaking harshly, make use of all available means, battle, appeasement, and prayer. This is Avram's message to us, that we can do it, because whatever we do is for Hashem, certainly when it's an emergency, when something requires, and unfortunately we live in a time, in an age, that it is an emergency, where so many of our brothers and sisters, children, daughters, sons and daughters need to have an extra boost. Even outside of our comfort zone, we will, and B'ezras Hashem, we will see lots of Yiddish Nachas in good health, with simchas for all of us around and around. Yeshua, thank you everyone for joining. Those of us who are joining on Wednesday night, I look forward to seeing you then. New course, the course of meaning. And Be'ezras Hashem, same time, same place for Parshah next week. Sei gesund and a good week.